Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Networking Podcast. This is a new series that we're launching called Assured Forwarding. You'll notice we like to name our series after forwarding classes. We are networking guys, after all. So, in this new series, we're welcoming guests on, and it's all about nailing your networking interview. Today, we are very pleasured to be welcoming Ramzi Marjaba, who has his own podcast, actually. We the Sales Engineer. There's plural there. So welcome, Ramzi. Thanks for being our first guest ever on this series. I hope we can keep it interesting for you.
First
on
guest
any series ever.
On any of our series, yeah.
Indeed.
Well, I'm glad that Erwin thought of me, and by proxy, you thought of me for being the first guest. That means you couldn't find anybody better, but I'll take it.
No, that definitely wasn't it, Ramzi. Come on now, please.
Sure thing.
How you doing, Ramzi? It's been a while.
Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, welcome. Yeah. So just a bit of background as to how I came about thinking of Ramzi. Ramzi and I worked together on the same team at Alcatel-Lucent, now Nokia. Actually, my very first job was working alongside Ramzi in the third level support for one of the cell site routers for Alcatel-Lucent. So since then, we've kind of gone our separate ways in our careers. Ramzi's moved around, and we'll get a bit of feedback from you, Ramzi, what you've been up to. But it looks like we've kind of converged into a similar career path, as we both are working as sales engineers, solutions architect, technical pre-sales types of roles. So yeah, kind of good to catch up with you, Ramzi. What have you been up to this last few years?
Last few years.
No pressure.
Well, you mentioned I've been a sales engineer in the test and measurement industry. It's funny, people started saying that they see me more at Nokia ever since I left Nokia, mainly because it was my biggest customer.
Yeah.
I've been doing that since 2014. I started with one company, then moved to a direct competitor of that for a multitude of reasons, and I've been there since.
So did you leave? So when you left the team that we used to work on together, you went straight to sales engineering from that role?
No, I left third layer support to do the network design.
Oh, that's
engineering
right.
team.
Right.
Yeah, I was there for 1 year and 8 months to be exact. At which point I left that and went to Spirent, and then in 2018 I went to Keysight, or Ixia, formerly Ixia.
And how did you end up starting We the Sales Engineers? What was the gap, and how did you get to that point?
Well, I was a remote sales engineer for Spirent. I was the only sales engineer in Ottawa. The closest sales engineer to me was in Toronto, so 4 hours away for our friends south of the border. And basically that meant I didn't have anybody to emulate. I couldn't see what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. The salesperson I was working with wasn't really the greatest salesperson. He basically did the show up and throw up kind of discovery call, where he has a bunch of 2,000 slides that he goes through every discovery call and like, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? Mm-hmm. And I noticed that I don't know anything about sales engineering. And it was easier to get people to talk to me about sales engineering if I told them I have a podcast.
Okay.
And that's how I started the podcast.
It's genius.
Thank you. I heard it on a different podcast. So I haven't come up with an idea of my own. I just steal everybody else's ideas.
No, but it's been pretty good. So I've been listening to your podcast, and I was one of the reasons I thought about you for this was because you've actually recently had some really good podcasts around resume building, around personal branding, and you've been doing this segment, especially I guess you may have started right at the beginning of COVID or thereabouts, around No SE Left Behind, which is about you having sales engineers on who are maybe looking for a new job or looking for a job, and you ask them questions and allow them to kind of get themselves out there and use your podcast as a platform for them to get jobs, I guess. Is what it seemed like to me. Yeah. So I figured, you probably have some pretty solid experience, from the people that you've been talking to, and your own personal experience of going through your career path and talking to us about, how we get to taking a network engineer and how they get to getting an interview and how they then go on and nail their interview, which is kind of the purpose of this series. So that's how we ended up here. Yeah. Long-winded story as to how we got here, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
All right, so I just get to moderate this, right? That's you
Yeah,
guys are
yeah.
like old friends. I'm just the fly on the wall. So I'll try and moderate this as best as I can. I can be the timekeeper. You know,
Wait, is this a
it's a
debate?
tough job. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is like a presidential debate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Make sure you
Well,
talk over each other as much as possible.
That's
okay.
key.
I'm Lebanese. I'm good at that.
Okay. All right. So I think to provide some structure here, as Erwin said, I think let's start walking through the whole interview process. Right. That's at the end of the day what we're trying to accomplish here. Trying to impart some information onto our listeners around, I guess the multiple phases of getting a job. So there's the whole pre-interview. Well, actually, there's the pre-resume stuff. Like, what do you need to do? Certifications, all that kind of thing. Then there's the actual resume building. What's good to put on your resume? What should you leave off? And then finally, I guess we can talk about the actual interview itself, assuming you can get it based on the aforementioned resume. So I don't know if you had any questions you wanted to start off with, Erwin, and
No, I
maybe
just want to
let's try to stick to the agenda.
yeah. So not really any questions. I mean, I guess the first part of trying to get to nail your interview is actually getting in the interview. And you had a really good podcast on recently about resume building, and I actually learned a bunch of stuff from that. So maybe I don't know if you want to give us your kind of like top, like top
Top.
skills, top. You're in for the your takeaways, your top takeaways from that podcast you had on resume building. What are the things that you learned that you didn't know before that really kind of caught you by surprise and made sense or didn't make sense after the fact?
So you want the top.
The top, yeah, just to be
As
clear.
many of the tops as possible, ideally.
The one biggest takeaway that I got from that interview with Amanda Rico, PhD, was the executive summary. I always had an objective on there, and my personal resume, it was just an objective, and my objective was to get a job. But I'd have to say something to the effect of, I want to be like a productive member of the team and bring in my expertise to help your company, which, because that's what everybody wants.
Yeah.
She made me change it to an executive summary. She didn't make me change it. She suggested I change it to an executive summary where I talk about my strengths and what I can do for the company that I'm applying to. The biggest thing that I think about when I'm doing a resume, we're in Bruce. Are you also in sales engineering?
No. That's why I'm such an outsider here.
Well, it's good. Maybe I can help. When you write a resume, what do you think about when you're writing the resume?
Selling myself. By me.
Yeah. So you are selling yourself, but how do you sell yourself? Is
So
it
for
by
me-
telling them what you know how to do?
Yeah, I'd say honestly it is. I mean, like probably most resumes that are out there, my resume, granted, it hasn't been updated for a little while, but it tends to hinge on experiences that I've had in previous roles. And I like to highlight specifics, right? Like not about just I was a network engineer, but I like to highlight like specific projects and I guess more importantly, my role within those projects, like specific things that I've done, what I learned, and getting as detailed without, getting into the weeds as possible. Because I notice when I am interviewing people, and they've quite often got a lot of things listed in terms of experience that they have in the industry. Trying to pin them down on a specific thing that they did in relation to the projects or experiences that they have was always challenging, and it's always where I want to go. Like at the end of the day, I don't care that you helped build the space station. I want to know which part of that space station you built, and because I interview that way, that's typically how my resume is also built. So I tend to not list skills so much as I do kind of experiences and what they've taught me with as much specifics as I can without getting into the weeds. That's typically what my resume looks like.
Which is very good considering like most resumes I see is I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. But what I try to think about when I'm trying to apply to companies or even when I'm trying to sell something to customers, what's in it for them? Why do they care? Because if I tell them I know VPRN, there's a billion other people who know VPRN.
Right.
What does it mean for them?
Yeah.
Right? I've helped customers build VPRN networks or whatever, which got them millions of dollars of in revenue, which in the end meant they paid us to do more projects.
Yeah,
Right?
I always find
That
it's
meant
hard to like. Yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry. And I was gonna say I always find it hard. It's always a balance between you want to list certain things like VPRN as like a technology you've worked on, but
Yeah.
also you want to do the contextualize it, like exactly you were saying, like what is it that you did that actually brought value, or what value do you bring to the table by having done this particular VPRN project. But at the same time, you also need a place to be listing, especially in our field in networking, where everything is acronyms. You need to be able to have a place where you can kind of list all those things that you know or don't know about.
Okay, so I do two things in my job experience. In my job description, I don't generally put technologies. I put
Okay.
what I've done for the company. For example, I've achieved quota 5 out of the 6 years. For example, I haven't, but that's just an example. And I put in numbers. I put in numbers like I got 97.5% of quota. I got one for 2013. I got 122% of quota, and I put exact numbers. I don't round them up or down because people will assume, oh, you got 130% of quota. What does that actually mean? Does it mean you got 122 and you're rounding up? So I put exact numbers. And like when I worked at Alcatel-Lucent, I worked on $3 million worth of projects, or 3,100,000, whatever it is. Put the exact number, and you should, if you're working in networking and you have that information, you should be able to put it out.
Right.
Because that will show that you've worked on that amount for that company. You brought revenue for that company. And that's
Yeah,
what companies care about.
Yeah, and I think especially for a sales engineering type role where the numbers do matter, and what you did bring to the table does make a big difference, right? I think obviously if you're like a network engineer for a provider, you're obviously involved in bigger projects. You may not be privy to the importance in terms of the financials of those projects to the providers and customers, but definitely if you're in sales engineering, numbers around project sizes, revenue brought in, quotas, that totally makes sense to me.
So when I worked at Alcatel-Lucent, we did get a statement of work, like what we needed to do.
Yeah.
And it stated that how much the project was worth, how much our team was getting paid for that. And that's the number that, like, if I'm working on the entire thing, that's the number I would put in. I don't have a problem with that. And from a acronym perspective, I also have a different section in my resume that says like technical expertise. And I don't list everything that I have. What I do is I look at a job description. If the job description is asking for specific acronyms and I know that stuff, I would put it in my resume. If they're not asking for specific acronyms, I would leave it out. And frankly, most interviews don't come through resumes. Most interviews come from personal connections.
Right.
So even before having a resume, I think that's what you would need to work on. And you mentioned branding. That's something that you need to work on before having personal connections.
Right. How do you feel? So that's one thing that I found when I've interviewed people is you receive the interview and they have that technical skills section where they do lift off all those technologies that they know about. And honestly, more often than not, it's people listing stuff that they've once upon a time worked on and once upon a time known. And it, for them, the more they have there, the better it seems. And so then when you go obviously and ask them about it, you're not going to get the deep technical answer you're looking for. But from their perspective is they're hitting acronyms that they think a computer parser or scanner of resumes will pick up on and increase their chances of being a hit within the application process. And then when they get to the interview, then obviously it falls apart. But how do you feel about kind of embellishing, or I don't know if it's embellishing, but like increasing the amount of acronyms and the amount of technologies you have on there to try and get through that scanning process?
When I do my resume, I don't put bullet points like VPRN, VPLS, VMware. I don't put bullet points. I put working knowledge in, experienced in, excellent knowledge in, worked on this once in. I have different degrees of knowledge, so that's the way I do it. That being said, if someone is putting the people that I've seen who do bullet point forms, unless they're an expert in something, they don't put it in the resume.
Right.
You're saying your experiences otherwise. If I were to do that, if I were to embellish and put something in there, as soon as I walk into the interview, I'm gonna say something to the effect, I have a list of technologies. Some I haven't worked on in years, but I had to put it in there because you know I have other areas of expertise that I can highlight. It may not fall apart. You're asking the person to focus on the other things. If it is important for them to know VPN and they don't know it, can they learn it? Are there other qualities that can help?
Yeah.
That's what they need to highlight. If they need to know VPN before they get the job, then they're out of luck.
Yeah. So you think being honest on your resume is critical, and I know based on experience that I'd echo what Erwin said, that people quite often get into kind of the rat race of listing technologies, and I think in a lot of cases, even if they haven't had past experience on them, just straight up bluffing and hoping they don't get asked detailed questions on it. Do you find that often as well?
I haven't personally. When I look at resumes, when I'm doing the interviews, I don't really look at resumes. I tell them like, hey, what do you know? They tell me like, hey, I am very experienced in this certain technology. And then we start to dig in deeper into that technology. I start asking questions about that technology specifically. Mainly because technologies can be learned. It's the work ethic that cannot be learned. It's the way they interact with people that cannot be taught as much as technology. So if I find someone who's very good at something, and that's in sales engineering world, where you have to be able to talk to customers to get the job done. And generally, even if someone has the technology, I've worked with many people who know the technology amazingly. And you start asking them questions and they're flabbergasted. They can't continue. So from a sales engineering world, it's important to have human skills and technical skills. So I focus on what technology they know and dig in deeper, see how they can explain it more than what bits and bytes they know. In the networking world, it could be different. It could be that people are just focused on the technology itself. They don't care if this person cannot talk to a customer, which I doubt, because they're going to have to work with customers and build networks for customers. At least that's what I did. I don't know. Did that answer your question, or did I ramble on for a while?
No. I think it did. I tend to interview a very similar way in that I'll always ground it in an experience that they've listed. So I noticed you did XYZ on your resume a few years ago. Talk to me about your role in that project, and then all I'm looking for is depth, because in a lot of cases I'm hiring people that do not need to talk to customers, but at the very least, they need to be able to go into depth on any technology. I don't really care what it is. You could go into depth on how an airplane works if that's your thing. But being able to go deep is important, and being able to articulate what you're talking about and why you're talking about it is also important, regardless of whether or not I think you're going to be well spoken or able to do that in front of a customer. So I guess slightly different in that I don't care so much about being able, the imagining putting them in front of a customer and imagining how they're going to relay their thoughts, but certainly being able to go deep on anything, even something I don't know about. In fact, I love interviewing that way, where I want to learn something, so let's dive deep on a topic that you're an expert on and I know nothing about is awesome.
Yeah. So, and like when you add stuff that's not in there, it's obvious that you can tell if they've used it once in the past and they've never had to use it again. It's easy. If they've never used it in the past, then you're flat out lying and you just lost the job.
Yeah, it's true. And then that kind of ties us to the importance of certifications, because one way of the idea behind a certification is identifying whether you know something or not by just having the certification next to your name. And in networking, that was a huge deal. 90s, early 2000s. I feel like it's personally become less and less important. But that being said, there is still some value behind listing that you're a CCIE or you're a Nokia SRA or something like that. What do you guys feel about the importance of having that certification and how much value it brings to your resume or to your potential employer?
I'd be interested to hear your answer here, Ramzi. I'm very polarized on this topic.
It depends on the job. Some jobs require some sort of certification, so you need to have it. And it's always good to have some form of certification right by your name and your email signature when you're talking to customers, especially if you're building networks, right? You will have to email customers like, this is the network design. Having that, when I had the SRA, I had some form of credibility. Will it help you do the job better? Not necessarily, but it might open up doors for someone to actually get a job. And right now, like, there's a billion CCIEs out there. So
from a resume perspective, like, do you feel like from a resume perspective, I think you probably would list it, but
Yeah.
as someone who is looking to interview someone and you're going through a set of resumes, how much importance do you put behind the fact that they are a CCIE or an SRA or, you know, whatever the equivalent is in whatever vendor or networking space they're working with?
well, first thing, that sometimes they need to put it in just to get past the computer and talk to a human being.
Okay.
If I'm talking to a person, there is some form of, like, if there's someone with a CCIE and someone without, and they both talk the same way, I will take the guy with the CCIE.
Okay.
Just because I know he's been through it, right? He's
Right.
worked hard for his CCIE. It didn't just come out of the ether. Why didn't the other person not go the extra mile and get his or her CCIE? Right? These are the questions that pop in my head. But it's not the end all be all. Like, I could hire a CCIE who's an arrogant, I don't know if I can swear here, but
You can.
douche. Let's just speak in a little bit in French. Yeah. So I know you love French. So a little bit of a douche, and I wouldn't want to hire him. It's not the
Right.
only factor.
Right.
I don't know if you're looking for like yes or no, or like.
No. I was just trying to get an idea. I know, we'll let Bruce speak, because I think I have a hunch for where Bruce sits on the certification side. But go ahead, Bruce. Let us know. How do you feel about certifications?
The way Ramzi described it, I think, is actually pretty good. If you have if you have a candidate that's equal in every other regard other than a certification, then clearly you have a differentiator. So I'm all for differentiators. But
Yeah.
I've seen over the past through I guess my limited career of interviewing people, the certification doesn't tend to matter that much. Like, it doesn't weigh in on my decision at all, other than, are you capable of learning something? And, you know, we all, at least I think everyone here, went through the NRS program. I didn't make it to SRA, and that was maybe because I didn't see the value in it. I guess the problem is the way, like, when you're churning out certifications just based on, can you study some material and regurgitate it? Because that's typically how a lot of those certifications work. Like, the only real parts of SRA are the lab exams, in my opinion. The general, I guess the
Multiple choice stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the multiple choice written piece of the exam, just because there's so much content out there. I remember like studying for my exams, and you go and get like a couple of test, questions, or, test exam papers, and you go and sit the exam, and you'll see 50% of the questions in the actual exam that you got your practice for. And I mean, I think I have a good memory, I guess, because like I'd see them, like I don't even need to think, like I know the answer, and you always triple check because you're like, oh, this is too good to be true. There's no way they did this. But sure enough, like, I mean, generating questions is tough. Maybe Cisco does it better. I never went through the whole CCNA process, but generating questions takes work. There's only a certain amount of content, and you're often, at least in the early stages, trying to drive fundamentals, right? So you're asking questions around like subnetting and routing protocols, and how does MAC learning work, and things like that, which from a theoretical perspective are relatively easy to understand, I think. So it's not that they don't weigh in. They certainly do, but pretty much everything else weighs in more, unless you have like I guess the CCIE is a good example, because that's fairly high end. SRA would be the same. Like, if I saw someone with an SRA, that certainly, like, mentally checks a box for me. But if you can't, like, you could fail the interview horribly and have every certification available to you. You could get outpaced by a college graduate that has more passion, has a better work ethic, like you mentioned, Ramzi, or just has like a passion for what the job is going to require. And I will hire that person over someone who has a bunch of certifications any day. So
yeah, and I think I feel pretty much exactly the same way, and I feel that, like, there was, like I said, there was a time where having a CCIE was like your ticket to
Yep.
making money. You know what I mean?
For
Like there was a
sure.
time where
Yep.
like if you were a CCIE, you were in high demand. You knew you were going to get paid well. You knew there were going to be plenty of jobs out there for you. Whereas now I feel like having a CCIE is exactly how you guys described it. It's a super nice to have in a all equals comparison between two candidates. But it's not, for me, if I look at a resume and someone has a CCIE, it doesn't jump up as me as saying, oh man, this is a person that I really need to bring on board or overlook some of their other deficiencies. I feel like the certification process is pretty low on my list when it comes down to importance.
Yeah, I
on a
would.
resume.
I would agree. I mean, so let's pivot there. Unless you've got more to say, Ramsey. You look like you were like chomping at the bit there to say something.
No. Well, I was just saying I haven't done a certification since I left Nokia, really. Mainly
Yeah,
because my focus has been human skills, because I felt I was lacking there, and that's like the podcast and all that. So as long as someone can show that they're working on themselves in one way, form or another, like I would prefer if someone has a blog about we're doing CCIE or a blog about networking more than someone who's done the CCIE.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I do find what I look for in a resume is, I remember we interviewed a guy a couple of weeks ago, and on his resume he mentioned that he was maintaining a Kubernetes cluster at home for fun. And for me, I'm like, check. You know, like as long as this guy, can follow through in an interview, that's just a huge sign of someone going the extra mile to understand something. Or I guess even better, once you move on from understanding, if they really enjoy it, because I find that person is going to be willing to go a lot further to learn something. They're showing kind of an appetite for the technology, right? And that goes a long way with me when I'm interviewing someone.
It's definitely easier to do the job if you like the job. And if you like the job, that means it's a hobby. You're doing it on your own time, maintaining a Kubernetes cluster. So yeah, it shows that they're not going to want to leave at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and show up at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah, exactly. So how when I guess we're diving into like the interview process a little bit here now. When you're interviewing someone, Ramsey, do you find that you tend to leverage kind of, well, actually, I'll say, do you care more about kind of technical answers, or do you care more about kind of experience-based answers? So a good example is, I guess, asking someone what TCP port BGP runs over. I got asked that question so many times in like my early interviews, which is just madness. But do you care about that more, or do you care about the experience?
I hate it. I don't like these questions. I do ask technical questions, but it's more, talk to me about OSPF. If you had this problem, how would you solve it? More than, hey, like which LSA will be sent if this happens or on this router. Because I don't remember them. And even if you lie to me at that point, I'm not even going to even know. I'm going to have to look up the SRA course again. So I would prefer to, like, it's more of a conversation. Most of the interviews that I've had are more conversations that end up being technical, where we just end up whiteboarding stuff and solving a problem together.
Right.
And that just seems more, especially if you're doing network engineering. If you're designing a network, it's not as important to know the bits and bytes than it is to know how like a protocol works and how it can work in a network and what could happen if you overscale OSPF and that sort of thing, which would be better, OSPF or ISIS or BGP, depending on the situation. So I just, for me, that kind of conversation always seemed better. And it shows me that he can hold a conversation, which it is important to me more than maybe someone like you, Bruce, because of the industry that I'm in.
Yep. No, that makes sense. So maybe I guess we skipped over one question we said we were going to ask, which was on the preparation side. So let's assume your resume was good enough. You passed the robot. You ended up on the short list, and you eventually got called in for that interview. How would you prepare? I guess you can do research on the company you're going in to apply for. I know a lot of companies, maybe not so much on the technical space, but other companies in other industries really care about that kind of thing, learning their culture and that kind of stuff. What else would you do to prepare for one of these interviews?
Oh boy, I do a lot. I go all out, kind of like when I'm preparing to talk to a customer. I go on their website. I like to see what's on their website. What kind of news did they publish recently? At least to have a conversation with the hiring manager so that they know that I've done my research. Because that's the easiest way to show. If they have a freeware, like Splunk, for example, they have a freeware that you can just download and use. VMware has something so you can just play around. And so I like to I just like to go on their website, see what information I can absorb, take down notes, see what their like messaging is to their customers. Again, from a sales engineer perspective, because I'm gonna have to end up saying those words to their customers and playing around with their product, just so I can tell them like, hey, like I did this on this product. That was awesome. I had a hard time doing that. So I do spend a lot of time. If I have an interview, I do spend a lot of time just playing around on their website. Do you need more details, or is this what you're?
No, I mean that's that's a great answer. So like getting really entrenched and being able to speak intelligently in a relevant context is super important then.
Yeah, I want to show them that I care, right? I do care. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wasting my time trying to get that job. I don't mess around. Like if I'm going for an interview, I want that job, so I'm gonna spend some time. How important is it to you? You don't have to prepare at all if you don't care about the job. If you care about the job, be obsessed about it for a week before the interview, and go do it.
I like that.
Oh, that's a good answer.
The thing I was asked from the other side of that is when I'm interviewing someone, all the stuff that's around them knowing the culture or the company or the latest news or whatever it may be that they've gone and research on in my case, Nokia's website. It's important to me, but it's one of those things where, again, it's like if two candidates are equal, this person went the extra mile. It doesn't play a hugely important role to me in during the interview process. I think I'll have quite a few things listed above that, but at the end of the day, we're wrapping up the interview. We're kind of shooting the shit about stuff. This would come up in conversation, and the fact that they've done that research would definitely be a plus on my side, that we can converse about some of the latest technology that we've announced, maybe some of the culture that we maybe put forward to our HR website, like whatever that may be that may come up, that would ease the conversation at the end of an interview or the beginning of an interview. Definitely plays as a plus. But I'd rather hear about them tell me and be able to answer my questions, from a technical standpoint, or, if I'm interviewing for like a sales engineering role, maybe those people skills, that type of stuff is obviously higher rated from my perspective. But yeah, the kind of understanding and the conversational piece is definitely a bit of a differentiator when it gets down to the end of it.
Yeah, like just to add to that, there should be a base technical knowledge that everybody should have. Obviously, if you can have all the human skills in the world, if you don't have a base technical knowledge, you're not going to get the job. It's the differentiators that we're talking about.
Exactly.
If you read on the job description that you need to know OSPF and you don't know, you better be out there trying to learn OSPF more than try to learn about the culture for that company.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But that being said, if you're gonna get to a point where you're equal to somebody else, what are the little things that give you an edge? That's what you need to think about. And you can get an edge by learning about the culture or by playing around with that company's product. And from a sales engineer perspective, Erwin, when you're going to meet a customer, you might do some research about that customer first to understand what they want and what could potentially be their problem, what could potentially solve it.
Yep.
So if you're hiring for a sales engineering job and the sales engineer or prospect did not go through the effort of learning what your problems might be, like
no,
Nokia,
that's a good point.
So how do you know this is going to be life altering for you? You're going to get probably a raise, probably a good commission. If you're not going the extra mile for that, how are you going to go the extra mile after you have the job to go talk to a customer?
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, especially in the sales engineering role. Yeah, totally agree. Agree.
Yeah. So I guess we're talking about the differentiators, right? The small, I guess I wouldn't call them fringe, but the less important things. I guess technical knowledge is a very, very important thing. Outside of just like raw technical knowledge and, for a sales engineer role in particular, I guess, being able to speak and sound intelligent, being able to articulate thoughts well is very important. Being able to understand customers' problems is important, and being able to, I guess, I wouldn't say being empathetic, but the ability to understand their use cases and potentially provide solutions for them, all super relevant stuff. I know for me, when I'm interviewing people, how I like to kind of analyze a skill set is, like I said, A, to get them to go deep on something that they know, but also to take them into kind of theory land as well. I don't know if you guys see that often on kind of the sales engineering side of the fence, but I like to find a question that they don't have an answer for and then get them to theorize an answer for me, like on the spot, mainly because I just want to see, whether they're an analytical thinker, if they're just going to try and shotgun the solution, if they're going to try to work through it, if they're going to ask questions and try to, figure out if there's an answer I'm looking for. What are the kind of, I guess, important skills outside of everything I just mentioned that you weigh above all those kind of smaller differentiators?
Well, this is going to sound weird. For me, I want to know that I'm going to like the person that I'm going to be working with. If I'm not going to like again, in the sales engineering world, if I'm not going to like the person I'm interviewing, then it's very likely that my customer is not going to like that person that they're talking to. So there's no point in even going further. From a networking world, yeah, I'm going to be working with that person shoulder to shoulder, and there will be interaction with the customers. And I know it sounds like kind of shallow, but people buy from people they like. People like to work with people they like. No one, if you guys didn't like each other, you wouldn't be doing the podcast together.
We don't like each other.
We don't like each other at all.
Damn it, you're the exception to the rule.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, and I think it comes down to those like personal skills, right? I mean, they're not just relevant for facing the customer. They're relevant for your colleagues, the people you're going to be in the trenches with.
Yeah. And there's also integrity. Like, that's another thing that I look at. If they do a mistake, are they going to own up to it? Or are they going to throw somebody else under the bus? Right. It's hard to measure that in one interview, which is why you have to do several interviews to actually understand the person and take your time hiring people and fire quickly. But if you're the one interviewing for that position, try to be likable, right? If they like you, it's easier for them to hire you, and actually it's harder for them not to hire you. Like, they will apologize. Like, I've had that before. I moved to Keysight. I interviewed with a company. I'm in networking. The company had a C++ kind of product, right? I haven't done C++ since university. I was a finalist there mainly because they liked me, and in the end they apologized, like, sorry, we really wanted to hire you, but that guy actually knows C++.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, what are you even talking to me for?
A key skill set.
Right? Like, why are you talking to me for? Like, yeah, I would hire him too. So
yeah.
One of those things, actually, Bruce. Like, I actually like doing that type of stuff. Like, you're trying to get them to explain something that they may not know and theorize about it. And it really tells you a lot about their thought process. And there's those folks who come out and just try and bullshit you, which you can catch right away. And you're like, well, you don't actually know that. You're just saying that as a matter of fact, but you don't actually know the answer. And then there's those who kind of, ask you the questions, they work through it. And, they'll say, I don't really know how this works, but this is kind of how I would go about it. And that's how you determine, how they think, which is actually pretty good. But one thing that I've done recently, and this wasn't my idea, but I was a part of the process, was to give someone a bit of a research project for a week. So we had a first set of round of interviews, narrowed down a few candidates, and then we had a process where we basically, in this case I came up with a scenario where they had to go and do a bit of research. We gave them a week to do so, and then come back in a second or third round of interviews and just walk us through what they had found out, how they would solve this problem, and that tended to give us a good indication on how they went through their thought process and how much effort they were able to, how much knowledge they were able to gain in a week's worth of time, and kind of where they ended up. Have you guys done much of that in terms of like scenario building, research projects, give candidates time to put some effort behind something and then come back to you with a presentation or a demo or something of the sort?
Is that for me or for Bruce?
Either. You guys.
Us.
Us.
Right. Well, I'm the guest, so I'm going to let Bruce answer.
Okay.
I like it.
Love it.
I like it.
Love it. I mean, I've got a pretty quick answer to this. I typically don't get a second shot at a candidate.
Okay.
I guess I don't really know why that is. Maybe I'm just an asshole. I don't know. Now, I have been kind of part of some of that process, but it's typically been when we're like super on the fence with somebody and
Yeah.
they haven't been able to convince us, but we're kind of desperate to fill the role. So we want to give them a second chance. And I think in the ideal world, if you get to the state where you haven't convinced them after the first round, and by round, I mean like 5 or 6 interviews with, 5 or 6 different technical people, and you come out and you've got kind of medium or maybe even below medium marks. Typically, those exercises for me have been used to try and push someone above a bar, and it's never worked. I can tell you
Really?
that it has never worked. Yep, they've always
So I would
failed.
say this particular case was pretty much exactly that. It was exactly a candidate who was on the fence, and this was like the last thing we're going to do is let's see what they come up with, So it was
Yeah.
pretty much exactly how you described. But that being said, after I went through the process, I feel now that I want to actually integrate it as part of the regular process, where you do a first set of interviews, you kind of narrow down your candidates, and then I like the idea of putting this like research project into the mix as part of an actual interview process. It's happened to me. Hopefully, none of my superiors at Nokia are listening. But when I did interview outside of Nokia in the past, this was something that I had to do, and I remember being pretty stressed about it and putting a lot of work behind it. But then on the other side, now that I've been on the other side of it, it actually gave me a lot of information. Like this gentleman I interviewed, it gave me a lot of insight into how they work, into how they go and prepare for things, how they learn things, how they present, how they demo things, because this was part of the research project, right? And given a short amount of time, how much can they absorb and how much can they convey of what they've absorbed, right? So I actually feel now that going forward, I'd like to introduce that as part of the regular interview process for any candidates that I may be interviewing.
So I just want to add that in the sales engineering world, that's fairly common.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, you have like 3-4 interviews with sales engineers that could be technical, could be non-technical. And if you get past all that, you either end up doing a demo or a presentation on the potential employer's product, which means you have to research a lot and actually do a demo to a bunch of people who know a lot more about it than you and pretend like you know more about it than them. So that's fairly common in the sales engineering world, which I think it should be common in any world. And one thing I wanted to add, I don't know if Harry ever told you that story, or when Harry Schenk is our former manager, and what he liked to do during interviews is he'd ask someone a question, the interviewee. The interviewee would say, "I don't know," and instead of moving on, he would just dig in more, just to see how stressed he would get. Now, we were in a third layer support role, and stress was part of the job. Nobody calls third layer support to say thank you. Everyone calls third layer support to solve a problem, and they're usually pissed. So that was a way, like, depends on the role. Like, if you're doing network engineering that's not necessarily stressful, you don't need to go down that road. If you're going through support, which happens in networking, and you want to be able to tell how people can deal with stress, there's different tactics for everything. And there is not one interview or one role that have the same interview as another role. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's true for sure. I mean, I like the idea of getting someone to kind of go do homework. It's not often you get the opportunity to do that because, I mean, typically how interviews have worked for me, both on the receiving and the giving side, is you run the gauntlet, right? You do the 8 interviews or however many. 8 seems to be our average.
I was saying, first of all, I'm going to interrupt you right there. I 8 interviews seems highly excessive to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Been through worse.
I also have looked outside of Nokia in the past, and in both cases, I had like an interview with an HR person. That's pretty typical. Make sure you're not a crazy person. Then a hiring manager, typically not the hiring manager, but a hiring manager, and then another hiring manager. And then you get flown out somewhere for an entire day of, we're going to interview you for 8 hours with 8 different people, including an interview over lunch. Like they'll take you to lunch, you'll go out and sit down and they'll interview you during lunch as well. So, and I mean, granted, I've only looked twice recently. I shouldn't say too recently, if anyone from Nokia is listening. This was many, many years in the past. But in both cases,
many hours in the past.
In both cases, that was the recipe. And you know what? I actually loved it. I thought the entire process was awesome. you kind of get it. You like rip that Band-Aid off straight away. The first screening is like basically the equivalent to a phone screen, right? Like they'll ask you a few technical questions, get to feel you out. It's more of a, I want to say like a personality test rather than being like full on technical. That is kind of in my experience. And, granted, like you said, Ramsey, it depends on the role, right? Like no two roles are going to interview the same. The requirements are definitely going to be different. My kind of, that whole exercise thing, I end up playing that out kind of indirectly when I interview people based on that whole like theoretical scenarios that I was talking about earlier, right? It's just there's no preparation time. There is no time for you to go and research something because I care more about your ability to solve a problem and how you would go about solving the problem. I don't care that you come up with the right answer. Like that's not what you're looking for once you're into theoretical land, right? If they get the right answer, I mean, that's amazing. But really what I'm looking for is work through a problem that you don't fully understand and how would you apply your skill set and your experiences over the past to solve that problem. And you quite often get pretty deep when you do that.
How does one prepare for that? I mean, if we're keeping to the ethos of this podcast, is how do you prepare for those types of questions? I'm not even sure you can really. It comes down to kind of your natural ability and things, right?
It's life experience. Like everything you do is a preparation for the next thing that you're going to do. Right? You broke something today, so that next time when you're doing the same thing, like I did a big bobo when I was at Nokia Network Design. Luckily, it was a greenfield where I logged into, I think it was PuTTY or CRT at the customer's website. I just wanted to copy their config, highlighted everything, right-clicked so I can copy. Instead of copying, it pasted everything. So it repasted the same configuration. Luckily, there wasn't any configuration changes, but I learned for next time that I'm not gonna do that anymore. And that's you go through enough, you put yourself out there, you go through enough issues. The big problem with interviewing is you interview, like you just said it, you interview once every, if you're in a hurry,
many years.
Many years ago.
But like the frequency of interviews is not that, like you may interview for one job, you went interviewed for like 5 times. You did for 5 different companies because you're tired of the company you're with, you're moving on. And then you don't interview for another 3 years. And you're supposed to go back and just, perform. Just keep in mind that every time you're doing something, keep track of it for the next time you want to interview. Just, this is an idea that popped in my head, I'm going to write it down. Or, oh, look at this issue, I solved it. How many times did we get asked, like, hey, have you ever had a bad customer and how did you deal with it? Or have you ever had a big problem and how did you solve it? Like, yeah. These are common questions and most of them. So you can be ready for those. And for the theoretical questions, I feel like the best solution is just to ask more questions. How would you solve this problem? Well, what do you mean by this problem? What's happening there? Get more information. The worst part about it is, like, sometimes the interviewer is a hard ass and he won't give you any information or she won't give you any information, in which case you're screwed either way. So answer it the best way you can. But if you can ask questions, ask questions.
Yeah. And actually, just to jump onto that a little bit, that's one thing that I would recommend doing is actually, even if you're not actively looking, doing an interview for the sake of like practicing interviews. And obviously you may not go all the way because that's wasting people's time, especially if you're not actually looking for a job. But there is a part of being able to do interviews and practicing them and going through the motions, which are very beneficial. And I've gone through, again, many, many years ago, a couple interviews. And just after the first one, it made me realize what I didn't know. Do you know what I mean? And until you actually go through the process, it's hard to understand what questions are going to be thrown at you, what scenarios are going to be thrown at you, what people are looking for, like we're discussing here. So hopefully some of this podcast brings that to the table for people. But I actually would recommend, going through the motions of applying for a job, getting an interview. And you may not go all the way because you don't want to waste people's time, especially if you're not that interested. Who knows? It may lead to something amazing. But if it doesn't, at least go through the initial process and try and get that experience of interviewing with people. Because that's worked for me. I now, I'm of the opinion that I should be interviewing, once a year somewhere. Yeah, to just get that experience, get those questions thrown at me, make sure that I'm on top of my game when it comes to that stuff, right?
Yeah, to add to that, I know for sure the memories that stick with me are when I've interviewed and my interviewer has asked a question and I'm just flat-footed.
Yeah,
And I'm
exactly.
like,
Right.
I don't know anything about that topic. And straight after the interview, you go home, you're like, oh, I'm an idiot. I'm an
yeah.
idiot. And then all of a sudden, the next day, 4 hours researching that exact topic, and all of a sudden you're an expert. And the knowledge sticks with you because it's set with some trauma. There's like a little bit of pain there, you know?
Yep.
So no, I definitely agree. I guess we're running close to time, so maybe we should try and
All
have a decent close.
Last topic, then to close it off. Maybe
You can go. I can go a little bit longer. If I
No,
fall
it's okay.
asleep, if I fall asleep in front of you, you'll know what the problem is.
well, we should try. We're getting to the top. Yeah, we should try and wrap up anyway, just from a time perspective. But yeah, so last kind of topic I wanted to hit on just to close it out is maybe for you, Ramzi, a question. What are your top interview blunders or stories or things that you did that you shouldn't have done in your own interviews, or maybe that you've interviewed people, or maybe that you heard about through your own podcast, horror stories from people? Your pick as to which you want to talk about, if any.
Yeah, I'll talk about my first interview ever in Canada, where I was still a co-op or intern. I was trying to get an internship with a company. I was at Carleton University up here in Canada, and they send you to a room because it's a phone interview. You wait there, and we didn't have cell phones at the time. We were just sitting there and waiting for the phone to ring. And for some reason, I knew that they were going to call at 9:30. And when 9:30 hits and the phone rings, I jump out of my seat as if I'm not expecting it. But anyways, it was with BlackBerry or RIM at the time. And it was a very good interview up until the end where they told me, like, how do you pick your phones? And then what did I say at the start of the call? I said, you're supposed to like sell yourself and what's in it for them, right? Show that you care. My response was, oh, it makes calls.
At BlackBerry.
Yeah.
So they were like, go pick up your Nokia then, because that's going to make a phone call for you.
Yeah. Well, did I have a Nokia? I think I had. Yeah.
We all had Nokias.
But yeah, that was the biggest thing. Like I answered honestly.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that's how I picked my phone. Like oh, and, like it's a calculator or it looks cool, whatever. None of that. Just it makes calls.
Oh, that is a good one.
Whoops. Bruce, do you have any stories you wanted to share?
I really don't. I mean, I've certainly interviewed people and they've messed up, but they're not like they're not like that. They're just people.
I can share another story if you want.
Yeah,
go
please.
ahead. Yeah.
So it wasn't really a blunder, but it was a tough situation where. So for the 3LS job that I got the job, like I started in 2009. You started a couple of years or a year later, Erwin, I think.
Yeah, 2010. Yeah.
Did you start when Mira was there?
I overlapped for like a month.
Okay. So Mira, she was like a senior team member there. I met her at a barbecue. I was out of a job for a few months because I just graduated university and I was supposed to go back to Nortel, but that didn't work out. 2008, it went kaput. So I met her and she said she's looking for someone, or the team is looking for someone. So I went and applied and I got an interview. The problem was another key team member, Ali, does that ring a bell?
Well,
he had recommended somebody else. Now I made a better impression on the manager, but Ali was vetoing me. So Mira calls me on like a Thursday at 9:00 in the morning. And she tells me I had to be at the office at 11:00 in the morning. And wear casual. I'm like, what do you mean? What does that mean? Wear casual? I'm applying for a job. For me, wear casual is a
just
suit.
show up.
Yeah. So I didn't put a tie on, and he went through my resume. Ali, I went with Ali and Mira. Mira did not say a word. Ali was going through my resume with a fine-tooth comb. What's TCP? Which port does it use? Which bit does it do that? He went through every single. I almost crapped my pants by the end of it. And in the end, he walked out. It's like, okay, you got the job. And it wasn't really a blunder, but it was the most stressful interview of my life because I was out of a job for 4 months, and that bastard was standing in my way. And we're still friends, a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, I think it's good.
All right. So
Awesome.
thanks Ramzi. Thanks for being our first ever guest. on the Networking
pleasure.
podcast.
It's my honor.
It has been a pleasure having you. If you haven't checked out Ramzi's podcast, We the Sales Engineers, we highly recommend it, especially if you're in the field looking to make your way into your next employer. I'm sure there's loads of tips there.
Where can people find you?
Well, wethesalesengineers.com or wethesEs.com. Ramzi Marjaba on LinkedIn, We the Sales Engineers on LinkedIn, and We the SEs on Twitter. I don't use all of those, but that's where you can find me.
Okay, cool. And we'll link him in the description below on YouTube and all the different descriptions we have for the different platforms. So you can go find Ramzi on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever you need to find him. He'll be there.
Cool. All
awesome.
righty.
Well, thanks, Ramzi.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ramzi. And we won't catch you in the next one, most likely. But Erwin and I will be here.
You're leaving me behind?
That's right.
Yeah. Only for the next one. You can come back.
All right, cool.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you've held on this long, we hope this was insightful. We hope if you are out there interviewing that you got some tips from today, even if they were only theoretical. And we'll catch you in the next one. Hey, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, please do let us know any feedback or criticisms you may have. We can be reached on Twitter, YouTube, or our website, ntwr.kn, where you'll find this episode and many others posted. For those of you on YouTube, if you liked the episode, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you didn't like the episode, feel free to hit the thumbs down button twice. On a side note, you know those cliche, these are our opinions and not that of our employer statements you hear all the time? Yeah, we unfortunately have to make one of those. The benefits of working in the industry we want to publicly have an opinion about. We've done our best to remove bias, but we're only human and we make mistakes just like you. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next one.